Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful individuals. You know it's another epi of League Got Black. My name is Eric Schneider Han Solo on today's episode as we begin or dive into some extended MSI 2025 preview. We're going player rankings today. We have now evolved from the team rankings to look at the players, and we got mid lane, jungle, top lane today, solo lanes and their pals in that jungle side. And these are always a little tricky to do because obviously most of these players have never actually matched up against each other. They've had very different opponents and paths to even qualify for this event, and even the meta usually shifts a little bit. We see a small transition in playoffs, and then any international event kind of has its own micro meta that we eventually see develop, and that probably will be the case here at MSI, even though we've seen signs of things already shifting to different types of champions, subtly, but still a little bit different. And we're looking at mid lane to kick things off, which is stacked as always, and we're going to include them all 10 mid laners, all 10 in each role, that is, but we're not going to, let's be honest, I'm not going to fully say how I feel about the LTA Stealth squads, or even a guy like Emo on GAM, who is a name we've seen before at international events, but I'm obviously much more familiar with the upper half of this list. That being said, I will highlight Hongq, of course, who stood out in some of his rookie performances at First Stand. We're getting him at a second straight international event, and I'm super excited to see him match up against some of these top tier mid laners. Obviously, he was only exposed to guys like Cream and Zeka in that opening matchup, so the development for him and Flying Oysters as a whole, super excited to see. And obviously, there's some titans on the Rift in terms of mid laners specifically, so excited to see this young kid show up. Then we have Quad ahead of him, which maybe seems a little bit harsh, and obviously this whole trio of Jojo, Caps, and Quad, I feel like are at a very comparable power level. I know Quad at times has been clearly the best mid laner in the LTA. It's basically been between him, Loki, and Quid for the majority of it. And oh, look at that. 3 Korean players that are dominating the LTA North, something we are so very accustomed to. But Quad obviously has some nice pocket picks that we've seen throughout playoffs, and was the factor in a lot of the playoff wins for FlyQuest. And we've seen teams really focus Masu a lot more against Fly and kind of take him out of team fights, or ensure he's not the guy who's able to take over some of these matches. And Quad has stepped up admirably. Picks like Cassiopeia, all the meta standards. Excited to just see more growth out of him. But we have these 2 EU mid laners a little bit ahead of him, and it's very similar. I would accept all 3 of these guys kind of shifted. I think it's fair to put one ahead of the other. I know Jojo just beat Caps in that head-to-head, so it might seem nutty to have him ahead of Caps, but Caps still actually bounced back in playoffs after a kinda slumpy, not his best individual level throughout the regular season, and was one of the main reasons why G2 was mired in this seemingly regular occurrence of a slump for them. But he's still, G2 is not going to be a good team or making a deep run unless Caps is playing at a high level, and sometimes an incredibly high level. But he still had 7 more solo kills than anybody else in the LEC playoffs, and he had the best laning numbers, at least in terms of CS, of anyone in the LEC mid lane. That's despite, again, losing to Jojo, who we've seen kind of shift his play style and emphasis as a player. We've seen him more prioritize teammates around him, less so dominating the laning phase, which when he was at his best on EG was kind of what Jojo was known for, was stomping that lane. But he's diversified his playstyle palette, which is something we saw out of Caps throughout the earlier years for him. One of the crazy stats about Caps is my man has only played 1 Azir game throughout spring regular season, 0 in spring playoffs. 1 Azir game most of the other mid laners on this list, JoJo included, Azir is either their most played or in their top 3 most played. So the fact that Caps has only played one, whether you want to call that a detriment or not, I don't think it is. It's just kind of a differing in champion pool choice. But Caps obviously has a little bit more international experience, but we have seen JoJo show up. So again, these 3 almost interchangeable from the West. Then we get into the big dogs, and Faker in the regular season, I would have been scared to even put in that 4 spot, and it would have been kind of a legacy to have him kind of in that same conversation. But as we've seen, number 1, a massive level up from T1, and number 2, a little bit of the shift in terms of what picks are. We know Azir is always going to be there for him, but now all of a sudden these more engaged champions, Ahri and Annie, he looked so much more comfortable on kind of being the guy who can press that go button for T1 and have the team follow up behind him. He looked leaps and bounds more comfortable. Obviously the rest of his team playing at a level a higher level helps as well, but Faker looked much better in this playoff push for them. So easy slot in that number 4 spot, which again seems low, seems crazy to have Faker here, but we're not sleeping on a guy like Shanks, and I think a lot of people are going to become familiar with this dude's game at this tournament because Anyone's Legend, despite beating BLG in back-to-back series, I still feel like are coming into this event having to prove something, having to prove that they are worthy of being that number 1 LPL seed. Obviously, Shanks is a new kid on the block when it comes to international events, but this guy quietly just had the highest KDA damage percentage and kill participation among all mid laners in the LPL playoffs. And by the way, that KP percentage north of 80% is usually something strictly reserved for supports, maybe junglers. It's nutty to be in that 80 range as a mid laner. Usually it's high 60s, low 70s at best for some of these guys. So Shanks is very involved, obviously, with what the squad is doing over at Anyone's Legend, and is an integral piece of it. And you're going to see it. You're going to see that this guy can go toe-to-toe with the tippity top here, which is the same old song and dance of Chovy and Knight. Anytime there's an international event, I feel like the last couple of years, it's always been these two that are hovering in those top 2 spots, and this split is no different. At times earlier, or at least in the middle of the split, it was looking like Knight was putting together his best individual run that we've seen in a couple of years, at least since that JDG run in 2023. Cooled off a little bit in those playoffs, and obviously especially in those head-to-heads against Anyone's Legend and Shanks, but still no question Knight has the individual talent and power level to be in that number 2 spot, but it's a distant second to what we've been seeing out of Chovy throughout this entire year. He's done it on a whole bunch of different champions, as is accustomed to and we're used to with him. His laning numbers are still absolutely insane, but the confidence and sheer will and determination that this guy's playing at is, I feel like I keep saying this every split, time and time again. It feels like Chovy has reached his highest level, and then he seems to get a little bit better. We're still waiting, of course, to see that on that international stage to meet that absolute domestic domination that we've seen over the last 3 years now on Gen G. But there's no question that the other 9 mid laners, if there's one guy they're most excited to match up against, maybe except for Faker because he's very used to matching up against him, but they would say Chovy as the guy on their list that they want to see just how regal is this dude's lane kingdom, because everybody has been talking about it for a very long time, and rightfully so. But a pretty stacked mid lane pool across the board heading into MSI this year. A slightly less stacked, but still very good jungle pool to look at heading into this one. Obviously, they're held in tandem with a lot of these mid laners, and again, so many times we do these lists for these international events, and it feels so harsh. Like a guy like Levi being at number 9, who had another fantastic split. GAM was the hardest contested team against the Flying Oysters in the LCP. It feels harsh having Levi at 9. It even feels harsh having Beishuan at 8, because he's had he had a great series against IG where he completely gapped JJ, but there's so many good players. There's so many good other junglers that you're putting ahead of these guys, and I'm not disrespecting what we're putting forward out of the West, especially even these EU junglers, both Skewmond and Elyoya. Facts right now, Skewmond has been G2's best player throughout the entirety of this spring split. I know, rookie coming in now, making yet another international debut, but if you recall, when Yike was making his international debut with G2 at MSI, he had a fantastic debut and was the highlight star performance for G2 at that event. I'm not saying that's fully going to be the case for Skewmond, because as you see this list, it's pretty dang good, but giving him a little bit of credit, even ahead of Elyoya, even though, again, just lost that head-to-head, and Elyoya is a fantastic jungler in his own right, who is no stranger to performing on the international stage at MSI specifically, even if Mad Lions of old have thrown up some duds. Elyoya, we saw, has now fully stepped into being able to be that supportive guy. We know Ivern is a pick that he can continually fall back on and has over the years, but I think you're seeing that transition of him trusting his teammates even more. A lot of that is obviously having another year with the same core around him, and of course being a little more willing to leave mid lane alone, because he seems to trust and have a little bit better synergy with Jojo Pyun than he ever did with Frescowi, which absolutely makes sense, because mid lane was a teensy bit of a liability in 2024 for Koi. So still feeling very good about both EU junglers. It's just you have a guy like Junjia, who obviously is also no stranger to the international stage and has really been a thorn in Levi's side now for this entire year, and has dominated the LCP ever since he came back. He's dominated most places he's played, even though he was a sub on EDG. Didn't necessarily dominate there, but there's a theme of the Flying Oyster players kind of usurping some of these spots from the other members of Western teams and the Eastern teams of the LPL, and well, less the LPL and LCK. It's always basically the top four, or from China and Korea heading into these events, but we're not sleeping on Junjia, and we're giving credit where credit is due. What is probably, we haven't fully done the AD carrier support rankings yet, but Inspired should be the highest ranking Western player coming into this event, and he slides into that 4 spot for these junglers. I mean, guy picks up another MVP, wins another finals, and I think what, obviously, I don't think it's underrated, this aspect of Inspired's game, because people are very aware of it, but just the communication, the game sense, and knowledge that this guy has is definitely unmatched in the Western scene, and honestly comparable to some of the guys, the best of the best from the LCK and LPL. If you listen to any of the comms for FlyQuest, this guy is always thinking 3 steps ahead of what to do on the Rift, and is one of the main reasons why FlyQuest is as good as they are. And you combine that with him just knowing how to path his own game perfectly, has some of the most creative pathing, and always pops up in places that you're not expecting, and not just willingness to play what is meta and play what is meta at an incredibly high level, because all this guy actually cares about is winning, but he can also pull out picks like the Kazakhs, even though there was some suspect moments in that game 5 against Cloud9 on the Kazakhs pick, where he got caught out a little bit, but still being willing, being able to go off the menu for some of these picks in the jungle. Inspired has been one of the best Western players, not just this year, but you can go back the last couple years. He has consistently been at the absolute top, but you couldn't put him ahead of any of these top 3, because after carrying T1, kicking and screaming, dragging them through the early days of the regular season, Owner has finally gotten some help around him, and he was only able to shine even more and excel in that surprise playoff level up for T1. So with the rest of the team now getting close to matching his level, he's really going to be able to shine yet again on the international stage at this year's MSI. But even Owner, you couldn't possibly be putting him ahead of a guy like Canyon or who's number one on this list in Tarzan. I know Canyon is usually just an easy lock-in for any event to put as that best jungler coming in, but you can't, again, disrespect or discount what anyone's legend has done. And after that Zed performance in the finals for Tarzan, how could you possibly not have him in that top spot? Guy you're most excited to see fresh off his first title in 7 tries, and much like Inspired, we've seen Tarzan play anything in this champion ocean so far, and gone are the splits or the days of memeing this guy for for having duds, for looking completely lost on the Rift, single-handedly losing series. They didn't lose an entire series throughout this playoff run, and the most important and integral and consistent player for anyone's legend has been Tarzan, which is something insane to say if you look back at the Weibo and LNG era for him. But this is a new era of Panda Samurais that we're getting out of Tarzan. Finally, the top lanes for today's part 1 of the player rankings. We'll be back to break down all the bot lane action, but this is maybe the trickiest one, at least of these 3 we're doing today. Number 1, we've got substitutes to get through for the Flying Oyster, but even the West, anytime we go to an international event, it feels like the weakest link in terms of an individual role or lane for the West is top lane, and I'm not sure that this year is going to be any different, because you see Whip Out, Broken Blade, Mirwin. Mirwin was great in the playoffs for MKOI, and I think as good as BB has been throughout his entire tenure on G2, I'm feeling better or more confident in Mirwin heading into this event. I'm not worried about Broken Blade being a liability by any means. I might be a little worried about Whippo. Liability is a bit of a harsh word, but we've seen Whippo try his dark technology against actual top-tier top laners and kind of get smacked, and we've seen him have some coin flip type within a series for sure, even within the LTA, so I'm a little worried that he might have some problems matching up against this top half of LCK, LPL, and even when you're talking about Driver and Rest, as we alluded to in the team rankings, Driver's your MVP of the LCP, but Rest is no slouch in their own right, and again, in fearless mode, having this 6-man roster, especially within even just top laners, I'm sweating matching up against the Flying Oyster, because there ain't no best of 1s at this event. We're going right into best of 5s throughout its entirety, so I'm scared for these Western squads, the prospect of matching up against this 2-headed dragon that is Driver and Rest for the Flying Oyster. And even what we saw, traditionally, I feel like this LCK and LPL top lane roster, you're going Thorin and Flandre, Whippo and Broken Blade, Mirwin, they should be able to smash those matchups. But this is, number 1, Flandre just held his own against Bin. We're still obviously giving Bin the edge because Bin is Bin, and there's no top laner with a higher ceiling. Even Deshai, I'm not saying has a higher ceiling than Bin when he's at his very best, but Flandre more than held his own in back-to-back series against them. And then Doran obviously had the major level up. Despite dying to Krugs, we saw him handle KT Rolster and then kind of give it to Zeus. And we saw, most importantly, and you've heard multiple people talk about this with Doran, his confidence is back. When he believes in himself, he plays at a higher level. And any of these mic checks that you've been seeing for T1, his teammates believe in him. They're constantly gassing him up. Oh, Doran, damn, Doran, okay, Doran, we see you. And I feel like that confidence from his teammates as the new guy on this T1 roster is invaluable to him. And we've seen, well, that's what you see is the level up out of him. So this isn't, don't be sleeping on Doran, don't be sleeping on Flandre heading into this event, and don't be sleeping on Keen. I feel like we've said Keen's name less than 5 times in this entire split for Gen G, where they just went 20-0, and that's because this guy is never a liability. He's never in a matchup that he doesn't like. He is Mr. Consistent for Gen G, and it really feels like since he's had this breath of fresh air where he doesn't need to be the hard carry, since he's been on this Gen G team, he's been so many years shackled down on the Afrika Freaks, the Guangdong Freaks, however many rebrands they've gone through, where it was you have to carry the game or we have absolutely no chance winning this series. He's stepped seamlessly into this role where he can still do that. He can still bust out a Quinn, a Gwen, something to completely take over the game, and we have seen him be able to do that on Gen G, but he doesn't need to nearly as often, but he's still got that wrinkle in the Gen G roster where he can do that, and this, again, I just hyped Flandre and Doran, but this is maybe the weaker top lane pool or the weakest solo lane pool that we have heading into this event. So there's an opportunity for both Keen and Bin to showcase that they are the creme de la creme, the bosses when it comes to the top lane that can completely take over a game and, let's face it, maybe even a series, because if the meta is changing to kind of more control, engage champions in the mid lane, there's an opportunity to be an absolute menace in that side lane. Obviously, Yorick was kind of a pick that popped up and took over a lot of side lane action. Bin was the biggest benefactor and got a lot of win rate increases when he was able to pilot the Yorick in the Maiden in that bot lane. Didn't see Keen play it as much, but Camille's a pick for both of these guys that they can take over matches, and you remember it was not long ago at MSI we had a little bit of vein spotting coming out of Bin on that top side. So yes, there's really Flandre all the way to Bwipo, I think can go toe to toe. Like, these could be evenly matched if Bwipo's on a good day. He's far and away the most coin flippy, even more than Doran of all these top laners, but the top is maybe the biggest gap for the top two. Well, Knight and Chovy, probably a pretty big gap as well, but Bin and Keen still definitely going to be head and shoulders above the rest of these top laners, but who knows? There's always going to be some kind of pocket pick that completely shake things up, whether it's going to be a counter pick to something like Yorick or some split push champion that's just going to force bans out early and often from all these opposing teams. But it's going to be exciting to see what the meta evolves in MSI, and I feel like top lane is where it will have the biggest impact. But that is it today for League Unlocked. My name is Eric. Thank you to all you beautiful individuals for hanging out as always.